Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Comic Book Club podcast, the club where we talk about comic books. I am the Weasel, and I still don't get why they canceled Daredevil Season 4, and this is my co-host.
Hello everyone, I'm Octavia Schuyler, they them pronouns, and today we will be reading Daredevil, The Man Without Fear. Since this was the Weasel's pick, I'll let him do the summary and how we got into it. Go ahead.
Alright, so, first a description of Daredevil. Daredevil was a comic book series created by Stan Lee in 1964, originally supposed to be a Spider-Man clone, the biggest difference being that his powers revolved around his disability, that of being blind. He uses echolocation for the most part to find things, but he's also got an enhanced sense of like smell, taste, hearing, every other sense that a human being has besides the ability to see. And over the years, many other writers have come along and added more to the character, adding more of a religious background to him, let's say, generally taking the character in many different directions. He's a character that's evolved over the course of the years beyond what Stan Lee originally intended, and has become a more rounded character because of that. One of the biggest writers being Frank Miller, who we will be discussing. Now, the way that I got into this comic book is I was first introduced to it through the 90s Spider-Man series, where he shows up in a couple episodes as a small arc in it, and also through the 2003 movie starring Ben Affleck and, what was her name? I'll think of it. They were married. But basically, they had a movie together, which was Daredevil. It's one of the best bad superhero movies I've ever seen in my life. I cannot get enough of it, and I cannot recommend it enough. It is the Room of superhero movies. Those of you who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about. And I got more into the character with the introduction of the 2015 series, which is not The Room bad. In fact, it's one of the best series you'll find on Netflix, and I still can't believe it got canceled to this day. The avocados at law have filled my deep black heart with endless joy over the course of these few years, and I'm glad that I can talk about it right here on this podcast.
If you don't mind me asking, what are the avocados at law? I feel like that's a reference I should be getting.
It's an inside joke in the series, because the whole point is, like, they're attorneys at law. But,
oh, right.
Yeah. There was a joke in the series, because they were, like, eating avocados when they were discussing making the company, or not the company, the law firm.
Right, yeah. Unfortunately, I suppose we should probably say this right now. The Netflix series is really, really good, but it's also very graphic and very gory, so if you're squeamish like me, brace yourself, or, you know, maybe read the comic instead, or I don't know, but, I did actually, because actually you were right, when we were 15, actually, it would be like we would be 14, just about to turn 15. Oh wait, no, we would be 15,
yeah,
just about to turn 16.
It came out my sophomore year.
Yeah, it would have come when we were both 15, about to turn 16, somewhere around there. And I remember I watched it with you, but and I really enjoyed it, but it also really freaked me out, and we ended up having to watch like Disney shorts and My Little Pony to sort of calm me down afterwards, because it really freaked me out. Ugh. And when I say very graphic, I mean, like, at one point, I think the thing that made me had to stop watching is when one guy, like, stabbed himself through the eye with some kind of spike, and that was kind of the stopping point.
He into a broken fence.
Yeah.
Which is another reason why this is the best show on Netflix, but anyway.
Yeah. So, good show, but brace yourself.
Yes.
Yeah,
and if you think
so
that's bad, you should see The Punisher.
Yeah. So, usually we do a spoiler-free section, and then we do, a spoiler-rific section. Do we want to be done? So I guess we'll just, do our general thoughts, and a spoiler-free general thoughts and recommendation for the graphic novel we are reading here.
Alright, well, would you like to start?
Sure, yeah. I liked it for the most part, but it definitely does feel like one of those things that's kind of written for people who already know some stuff. It kind of feels like one of those, you know how, like, you know, when you get into a series and finally they do the origin story and you're like reading it and you're really enjoying it. It's like, oh, this is how all of this fits into place. This explains so much.
Yeah.
It feels like that was supposed to be the reaction we were getting out of it. And since I have never, since I've never read any Daredevil before this, I wasn't getting that. So it was just kind of, it's not bad, but it's, it feels like one of those things where we definitely didn't have the context to get it feels kind of like an inside joke. It's a lot funnier if you actually know the context, and we didn't. So my recommendation would be, if you're a Daredevil fan and you've read other stuff before this, yeah, you'll probably enjoy this. I mean, again, I have no reference or context for how Daredevil usually is, except for the Netflix show. But yeah, go ahead, read it. It's only like what, $20? Yeah, $20. So I don't think, you know, I don't think I don't think it's a waste of your money. But if you're not a Daredevil fan, this is not probably not the best introduction for the character. I would definitely say the Netflix series is much better. That at the very least, I will say. So how about you, Go?
I pretty much agree with your statement. I think it's also important to point out that Man Without Fear is not Frank Miller's first foray into the character of Daredevil. In fact, I think it's one of his later ones. So it's definitely written to be something where, like, if you already know the Daredevil character, then you're going to enjoy this. I wouldn't consider it a definitive origin, because, again, there are many other people who have written other Daredevil origin stories. I think Jeff Loeb also wrote a Daredevil origin story. I think it was like Daredevil Yellow. But definitely, if you're looking for a comic book to get you into the Daredevil character, I probably wouldn't recommend you start with The Man Without Fear. But if you already are a seasoned Daredevil veteran, definitely check out The Man Without Fear, because it's a great book. I mean, it's got a lot of like Frank Miller's hallmarks, which you'll either love or hate, and we'll get into later on. But if you're a Daredevil fan, I'd definitely check it out. Other than that, maybe search somewhere else. I mean, you might like it. Who knows?
Yeah. I liked it all right, and I don't know anything, but Okay, so I think after that, we'll get into the spoilers. Okay, so now we're going to just talk about it freely. We're gonna give all the spoilers in the world, so if you don't want those, now is the time to leave. If you're like me and you don't care, and you'll listen to it anyway, go ahead and stay. So for the first few things we liked, most of them are kind of things we've talked about before. I do really like the art style here. How do I say this? It kind of has, it kind of feels like it's sort of a noir story, or like kind of a bit of a noir art style, but it does it so much better than Jessica Jones did it. Mainly, I think, because it's focused with, the lines are a lot thinner and a bit more sketchy, but we still have, like, sort of those intense shadows in a couple of panels. So yeah, I guess the art style is a good way to lead in. What do you think of the art style?
Yeah, I think it's important to point out with the art style that it is done by a man named John Romita Jr., who is the son of one of the most famous early Marvel artists, John Romita Sr., who was, I believe he was one of the co-creators of Daredevil, in the same way that Steve Ditko helped Stan Lee co-create Spider-Man. So seeing John Romita Jr. take on the Daredevil character, he definitely does keep to a lot of his father's similar art styles, but he adds his own flair to it. He definitely is very his art style is very kinetic with, like, the action of what's going on, which is something that I felt like Jessica Jones was sort of lacking a bit, but mostly because there wasn't any action in there. But it is definitely the Man Without Fear and John Romita Jr.'s artwork in general. It's very, like, pop, but it doesn't feel, like, too out there. It doesn't feel disproportionate. It's definitely really, really good art, I think, especially for the character. Especially the way, I wish that they got more into Daredevil's actual costume in this book, because of just how good that art style is. But I'm pretty sure that he's done other stuff that I could check out too.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
I will say. Yeah, I will say I'm very jealous of all the art. I think I said this in my last podcast, is that I'm trying to start drawing comics, but I am not the best at them. I'm just at that point where I don't feel embarrassed asking other. Oh, excuse me. I don't feel embarrassed asking other people to read them.
Yeah, well, again, like, the thing about, like, comic book art is that it takes more than one person to do it all. Even in this book in particular, I think, like, it has, like, a separate inker and a separate, like, editor, but for the most part it is, John Romita Jr.'s artwork, and I think it's very good, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But don't feel bad that if, like, you can't do something like this, because a lot of artists need help doing comics, especially in such a short amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a professional, so I don't have to feel bad about it. But anyways, another shameless plug to the Good Omens comic I made. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Everybody go read it. Link in the description. Okay, so easy to read. That was my next point. Is that it? Again, we've talked about that. We talked about this in the Jessica Jones episode, but it does flow a lot more naturally than Jessica Jones. Probably because Jessica Jones was episodic, while this is all a graphic novel, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it never. I guess that's the best way to say it. It doesn't really feel like it's sectioned off into different sections. Yeah, very articulate. It all feels like one cohesive, very consecutive story, which I do like and I do appreciate. I think I was able to read this all in one go in like an hour or two, a little while ago. I can't remember when exactly, but yeah. Any notes?
In terms of how easy to read it is, I mean, it's easy to read. I feel like discussing Frank Miller is a very interesting writer. I think he's got some interesting like ticks, and it's really interesting to get into his psychology. This isn't the first Frank Miller story I've ever read. I think the first one was probably The Dark Knight Returns. He also wrote 300, which I talked about in the last podcast slightly, but well, I think we'll get more into him as we go along. But as far as being easy to read, it's definitely that. Obviously, it's not for kids or anything, but it's definitely not like bloated like Watchmen was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it isn't too highbrow, it understands
Yeah.
that, we
Frank
want as
Miller-
many people reading this as possible.
Frank Miller is not a very highbrow writer by any means,
Yeah.
even when he tries to be.
All right. Yeah. The next point we have is really good action. I think you kind of touched upon this already, but yeah, this is very impressive. There's a lot, and I do mean like a lot of movement in this comic, and it all is very, very nice. Do you want to keep talking about that more, or did we already kind of say everything we wanted to say
I
with
think
the
we
art?
basically said everything we wanted to say about the art. Again, it's really great art, and it's very kinetic, and I enjoy it because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that probably brings us to our biggest point is I said the childhood section is really good, but after that he becomes more stone-faced, which makes it harder to connect with him. And you said that that was kind of just the way that Miller writes his characters.
Yeah.
You seem like you have a lot to say about Frank Miller, so I'm going to hand it off to you and let you talk.
Yeah, Frank Miller's characters tend to be very, like, macho, very, like, stereotypical, like, male superhero, almost like a cowboy, and where it's, like, strong, you gotta be strong and silent, and, like, really muscular, and, like, maybe crack a couple wisecracks every now and then, but for the most part, it's like, I'm a manly man, and look how manly of a man I am, and then he beats somebody with a stick. But, yeah, it's just Frank, like, the whole thing about, like, I'm just gonna redo it. Yeah, so it is harder to connect with him in a way, but that was kind of the point, I think, is, like, he starts off as, like, this innocent child, and then as he grows, he becomes more stoic, and that stoicism allows him to become strong, and that strength allows him to become a superhero. And, I mean, it's not as if Frank Miller doesn't give any character to Daredevil. In fact, quite the opposite. I mean, he does get pretty rough with the character. There's another Daredevil comic book that I have called Born Again, which is basically a Daredevil comic book that breaks down the character in the narrative and builds him back up.
Yeah.
So he definitely explores the character of Matt Murdock in plenty of his stories, but in this one, it's not explored all that much, honestly. Which is why I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as your first run with Daredevil. But I definitely say he does. That's basically just the way he writes characters in general. Like even Batman was also written in a similar fashion of him being like stoic or whatever.
Yeah. No, it's not that I have a problem with stoic characters, and you know, I still like him and I still root for him, but it's I don't know, like in the beginning you know, like you know, when he was a child, like I get it's kind of the point, like this is an innocence lost story to some extent, but it's like, you know, in the beginning he was very emotional, you know, and he got frustrated and angry, and you know, he also got happy, you know, he's just a lot more expressive, and it's like as we kind of got on, I was like, I kind of miss that. Kind
Yeah,
of wish we went back to just, you know, happy little Murdoch, like, oh yeah, I hit the arrow, yeah.
I did it. Oh no,
Mm-hmm.
my dad's dead.
Mm.
Yeah,
We did it, we did it, we did it, Goissimo.
yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's just Frank Miller in general. Is just the way he writes characters. Very like macho. Very like almost to a degree toxically masculine. But I'm sure we may not also get into that. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's just it, honestly, with Frank Miller and how masculine his characters are, it almost gets to the point where I have a theory that he's secretly like in the closet, which I'm sure we'll get more into when we read 300.
Oh,
But
did he write that as well?
yeah, he wrote that as well. And the funny thing is, in The Dark Knight Returns, I think I might have called it The Dark Knight Rises earlier, but in The Dark Knight Returns, he does have a character that is sort of portrayed as like stereotypically gay. Like he's not. It's never said that he's gay, but he is portrayed that way, and that is portrayed like negatively, which was also again like Frank Miller he was a writer in like the 80s and stuff. So especially back then, it was like seen as like normal, and I'm not saying that it was right, but that was just the
Yeah.
way he wrote it, which is also again I also find funny with 300 because it's almost like overcompensating in a way.
Yeah, like,
So
wait a minute, isn't that takes place in Rome, right? Or is that Greek?
300 takes place in ancient Greece. It was the Battle of Thermopylae, I think it was called. Which is exactly my point, and especially how the characters are designed in that book. Like we'll save it for that podcast, but I
Yeah.
might like if you ever see the movie. The movie is a direct, like almost rips directly from the art style, and once you see the movie, you'll understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Should I watch the movie before
I
we read
definitely,
that, or?
if you want to before, or you can wait until after. It really doesn't matter. They're basically just the same story. It's not a complex story or anything like Watchmen was, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
basic.
Actually, the funny thing about ancient Greece is the Greeks were really gay. Like
That's what I mean.
Apollo, yeah,
Yeah,
Apollo was bisexual. Hercules actually was lovers with his nephew, which is one of the other things about ancient Greeks is they were kind of yeah, they were kind of pedophiles
I
in a
think
way because
yeah,
they would have sex with very under well, okay, maybe not like very well, okay, yeah, like basically like 13-year-olds.
yeah,
So, yeah, that's kind of the gross part about it, but
yeah.
yeah, but it's also kind of ironic that, you know, actually I think actually one of the huge problems is that there's like a lot of modern day censoring where like they'll basically take, you know, gay romances and then like rewrite them as you know, straight romances or the perfect example of this is in the Iliad. I think it's oh dear, I forget their names, but basically the two main heroes are, you know, lovers essentially. I don't think it's in the original source material it's never specified they're lovers, but like literally a couple oh, excuse me. Sorry. Oh dear. You know, like literally a couple decades after everybody after that book came out, you know, in ancient Greek times, people just started to make basically fanfics of them, you know, as lovers, or you know, started to rewrite the Iliad with them as lovers. However, in modern day adaptations, a lot of the times movies and will have them written as like being cousins, to sort of like excuse why they love each other so much without like basically saying, oh, it's not romantic. And actually, I recently got into Yu-Gi-Oh again. I used to like that as a kid, but I kind of fell out of it, and I'm getting back into it. And in the anime, there's one point where like the main character, the Pharaoh, tells Seto, "Oh yeah, by the way, we're cousins in this timeline." And it's like, seriously, like I'm pretty sure that was added solely because the creators didn't want people to think that they were being gay, because oh well, if they're cousins, they can't be having sex with each other. But it's like, yeah, but they're definitely very close to each other in this arc or whatever, which is kind of annoying. But the funny thing is, it actually kind of backfired them in a way, because actually in ancient Egypt they were very much like the English kings, where actually the fact that they were cousins would have made them more likely to get together, because they had the whole keeping the bloodline pure philosophy, which, ew, but okay, whatever.
Sweet home Alabama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're also probably going to end up talking about this in Overture when we talk about Sandman next episode.
Probably.
Because, oh boy, Sandman wasn't as bad with it. Sandman did have explicitly gay characters, and actually an explicitly trans character in, like, the 90s, which, it wasn't handled very well. However, I'm going to say that's probably not a result of Neil Gaiman being transphobic. That's probably just one of Neil Gaiman's flaws is that he has a big habit of like trying too much and making things very quote unquote adult, or which basically just means very graphic and very violent and stuff like that. And so I don't think it's an instance of being transphobic. I think it's just that problem here in another, in another aspect of his book, which kind of makes it more noticeable, but still very disappointing, because trans woman gets killed for basically no reason at the end. And also, the two main, well, I probably shouldn't say the two main characters, but the main character, Dream, has a, for lack of a better word, I'll say familiar, basically Matthew, who was a human that turned into a raven and basically helps him out with his stuff. And it's like, okay, throughout this entire series, Dream keeps having really toxic relationships with women, and that is kind of the point. Like, the comic acknowledges they're bad, but it's like, why are we doing that when Matthew's right over here being relationship goals? The fight, like, you wrote a story where a fox spirit got laid within a week, and they, like, had 2 conversations. Here we have, like, 2 really close friends trusting each other with life and death situations. It's like, why don't you put them together? Anyways, we have gone way off topic.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't gone too off topic. Speaking of mats and relationships, I think we're about to talk about the things we didn't like, and I believe you brought up Daredevil's girlfriend, Elektra.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's her name. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. We're going to talk about Elektra. I'm going to introduce you to the concept of who Elektra is.
Yeah, I actually didn't know about Elektra, so introduce me to Elektra.
Alright, so Elektra was a character that was actually developed by Frank Miller in the mainstream Daredevil series. And the whole reason behind making this character is so that Daredevil's had a lot of love interests throughout the series, which should be pointed out first, but he wanted somebody that was able to keep up with Daredevil, because his whole thing was, with Superman, he was always like, well, why is he getting with Lois Lane, this, like, fragile human being? Why wouldn't he get with Wonder Woman, who he can keep up with? Like, they're both super-powered people. So he created Elektra, basically, to be this, like, super-powered love interest of Daredevil. So, like, the reason why she's all, like, nuts in the comic book and, like, driving off of cliffs and stuff is because that was her character. And, you say that the outfit is ridiculous. Like, I don't know if you've seen her outfit as a superhero, but it's also very, like, scantily clad, and I've mentioned before how, like, Frank Miller has a very, like, almost toxic masculine, like, style of writing his male characters. He has a similar thing with his female characters in that they're often very sexualized, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, especially somebody like Elektra is very overly sexualized in the comic books. But
Yeah.
yeah, so again,
Like, I'm looking at this.
yes, exactly. Yeah, but that's also one of the reasons why I like Frank Miller is that he's just so like unapologetic about the very stereotypes that he writes about, and I just find it's almost like the difference between like watching like I always like to compare Watchmen and The Dark Knight Rises because like they both talk about the same things, but they approach it from like two very different angles. Frank Miller wrote The Dark Knight Rises, and whereas Watchmen's whole thing was approaching deconstructing superheroes from the premise of like superheroes are often hypocritical, and it takes like a very like high brow stance at looking at them. Frank Miller takes the opposite approach, but still talks about the very same subject, especially in terms of like politics. But he always takes like the lowbrow like action hero approach, which is emblematic of the style of his writing, which you can either be a fan of or not be a fan of. But personally, I enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. We both probably want Elektra to walk all over us,
yes,
but
yes. Yeah, especially like... especially in the Netflix series, like not everybody likes that portrayal, but oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're not supposed to like that because we're feminists and equality, but it's like we're human.
I never took a political stance, but yeah.
No, well, it's most yeah. Well, like I've noticed in my own readings that it's more so like a pornography problem rather than like a sexism problem, or at least in the ones I read. This one I kind of would say is a little bit of a misogyny problem, mostly because with Matt Murdock, he's fully clothed, he's fully covered, he has a practical outfit for fighting crime. She, however, has most of her she's basically in a swimsuit bikini with like a lot of with crazy amount of hair. That would be ridiculously impractical to fight with. I mean, yeah, she can move, but she's like not protected from the elements at all. She's barefoot in the panel I'm looking at, and her hair would get caught on everything. So like I mean again, I have to admit I do find her very attractive, and I do like I do kind of enjoy it, but at the same time, it's like, you're not really supposed to do that.
You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to have a gun.
Yeah.
Come on. Take it. You're my boy. That was a Joker reference.
Yeah. But
yeah, definitely. Again, that's a whole take it or leave it thing. That's just how Frank Miller writes his stuff, and there is an argument to be made that it is very sexist. But I mean, based on his writing, I mean, I'm a fan of his writing, so I don't really mind too much.
Yeah, I don't really mind too much either because probably be honestly, if I'm being honest, it's mostly because I've read a lot worse, where like women are essentially just not supposed to fight crime or do anything at all, and they're like, oh, but I'm weak and I'm a woman. So I mean, I guess this isn't too terribly bad because she still actually is proactive, and she is a badass bad girl.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it's like, the fact that you did this to a female character but not to a male character, that is a little sexist, and also, this is not the time or the place for sexy women.
I mean, he did do scantily clad men one very famous time, but that's 300. Yeah. Anyway, you want to move on to the next point, or?
Yeah, I think we've probably talked about that to death.
Already signed it. Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Sorry, that was my family in the background. So the last point I have is the end mini-story with rescuing the children feels a little forced, and it would have been better had it just been him reflecting and deciding to help kids growing up like he did. Less action, more emotion, please. And basically what I mean by this is, there's sort of this, like he's kind of training this girl a little, And I feel like it would have been a little bit better if he had just decided, oh, this girl's a lot like me. I just kind of want to help her out. And, I should probably stay here and help other kids out. I feel like it would have been better if, had he just, kind of come to that conclusion through a lot less dramatic. Excuse me again. Sorry, I'm drinking a lot of soda. But, basically, if he just kind of came through that a less dramatic way, because as it is here, it kind of feels like he's obligated to stay and help out. Like, if he didn't do that, he would be an asshole. And I don't like that. I always like it when, characters do the right thing because they want to, not because, they would feel guilty if they didn't.
Well, I mean, that's also another way of just saying they want to, in a way. Like, because Spider-Man also has the same arc in many of his stories, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my main thing is, empathy motivating you rather than guilt motivating you is a lot more inspirational and a lot more, I feel, meaningful.
That's a fair statement. That's definitely a fair statement.
Yeah,
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I like the whole fact that it ends on, like, this huge action scene better. Because, again, it's emblematic of Frank Miller's style of writing. I know that I've said that all throughout this podcast, but definitely, I think that it's a great, like, explosive finale to the story, and it definitely... It's just good action, I think, and I like action in my comic books. If there was one thing that I will say that I didn't like about the Watchmen comic book, and I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this from people who like Watchmen, is that there wasn't enough action in it. It didn't have to be, like, overzealous with it, like this and a lot of Frank Miller's work is, but I definitely like action. Like, I feel like superheroes should do superheroing. And
yeah,
that's one of the things that I liked about this ending Daredevil comic, because it almost feels like the action is just used to tell that story, and it feels like almost cathartic, like...
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, one of the main appeals to superhero stuff is you get to see them beat up evil people, and, that feels really good. It feels right. Like, ha ha ha, you beat up an innocent person, now you're getting a taste of your own medicine. And also... Yeah, to some extent, I kind of don't like the idea of, like, superheroes being classed in their own genre, because, like, a genre is supposed to basically tell you, oh, hey, this is the overall, tone and mood, this is basically what to expect from the comic, and it's like, so, like, comedies are funny, romances have romance, etc., etc., but, I would say that, most superheroes should superhero, so, like, action is kind of, expected.
Yeah.
We expect them to be swinging or, running across the rooftops and doing other things. Sorry, I was remembering the Deadpool comic I gave you where Deadpool's trying to kill Matt Murdock. Yeah. And then, like, several superheroes come down and it's like, Thor's like, hey, I was getting a latte. You up to evil stuff over here. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will admit, like, your comment on, like, the emotion of, like, why he did it, I do sort of agree. Like, maybe a bit more emotion probably would have helped, but, I mean, again, this is Frank Miller. He writes his characters very stoically, but... Yeah, I do agree with your assessment. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, stoic. Stop being so stoic.
Yes.
Okay, so we only have two last things on things worth mentioning, and we already covered the Daredevil's girlfriend, Elektra.
Yeah.
All I have left is, do you want to talk about the show?
Yeah, let's talk about the show, because a lot of the things that you brought up were fixed in the show, which is one of the reasons why, again, I wouldn't recommend this. If you're going to get into Daredevil at all, I'd really recommend the Netflix series, because it combines the, like, action of the Frank Miller stories with a lot of the more cerebral elements that I think are in a lot of the other Daredevil stories. I want to say maybe, like, Jeff Loeb is a lot more cerebral with it, just based on the Batman stories I've read by him. But it's definitely, like, you're talking about, like, emotion and, like, why these characters do things. That series does focus a lot more on the emotions that the characters go through and, like, why they do what they do.
Yeah.
And it's got some very good, like, drama throughout. Vince D'Onofrio plays the Kingpin in it, and he's like just spectacular. Like I couldn't imagine anybody else playing the Kingpin any better than he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cast is great in the show, and it does have that one. The Daredevil does appear in the Defenders, and the Defenders does close off one of the arcs that Daredevil has in like season 2 of his show before you get into season 3.
Right.
So yeah, Daredevil is just like, without getting into spoilers for the show, Daredevil is just like a really great, amazing series. Definitely better than Jessica Jones.
Oh, way better.
Way better than Jessica Jones, yeah. And I really, really recommend it. I love this character. I just love the stories behind him, and I'm honestly disappointed by the fact that I've only read like 2 graphic novels. I'm thinking maybe I should read like probably a couple of the non-Frank Miller ones. Maybe I'll check out Daredevil Yellow, and I know that there's plenty of other stories that I can check out. But as far as Daredevil goes, I guess you want to get into final thoughts, or?
Yeah, this has actually been like the shortest one yet, and it's it's according to my timer, it's still like 42 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a short story. It's not like Watchmen was, where it was like 12 issues long, or like Jessica Jones, where it takes up 4 volumes. It's a very short. That's another thing. It's a short story. That's another reason.
Yeah.
That's another pointer to it.
Yeah.
But
then again, this probably is a much more reasonable length for a podcast.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
So, as far as final thoughts go, I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting with Man Without Fear, but I definitely would if you're already a Daredevil fan. But if you want to get into anything Daredevil, I'd probably look more into different comics, or I'd start with a series, which would probably be the easiest thing.
Yeah, I think I would pretty much say the exact same thing. The one thing I will say is that it does have really good art, and I probably will be using this as sort of like a reference book for, for other stuff I want to draw later on.
Yeah.
Because this does have a lot of actions, and it is really good at, staying on model and keeping everything exactly the same, which is very impressive when you're moving, people around in, this much.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I think we've pretty much said everything we've wanted to say. Next week we will be doing Sandman Overture, which is not next week. I keep saying this is the second time I've said next week. It's probably going to be like 2 months or something like that.
On Batman and Robin, will Batman and Robin escape the Pennyman's evil melting penny pot?
Yeah.
Tune in
but yeah,
next week, same bat time, same bat channel.
Yeah, next week, or I did it again. I just did it again. I literally just did it again. Next time we upload, we will be doing Sandman Overture, which is a one-shot that's sort of a part of a greater... yeah, the Sandman is actually considered basically a classic, and it's a 10-volume thing. I will be making a supplement video for that, basically trying to give a very brief summary, review, and recommendation of the Sandman series. But we will be doing Overture, and again, fair warning, there will be dicks. There is like a couple pages where the main character is completely naked, and I don't like that. I could have gone...
I am a powerful man!
No, actually, that's the thing, is after he's naked, like, directly after, like, he gets... I won't say he gets beat up, but, like, he exhausts himself trying to save the world.
Yeah, don't
and then
it for me. I'll read this. I haven't read it yet. I'll read it.
Okay. But yeah, so fair warning about that. But yeah, other than that, it's a really good, and that has the best art I've seen in a while. I'll talk about it more when we do it, but if you enjoy nothing else about it, the art is fantastic. So we will see you then. Until then, I am Octavia Schuyler. Have a lovely evening.